Everyone's starting to join us. We will start very, very shortly. Okay, let's go. It's 8 a.m. in Adelaide, 9:30 p.m. in London, 1:30 p.m. in Vancouver, and around the world, it's time for Global Community Engagement Day. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, or as Australians like to say, good day, mate. Are you okay? Before we get this whole show on the road, I will acknowledge the land on which we meet is that of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and pay respects to our elders past, present, and emerging. I'm on Kaurna land, which is the Adelaide and the Adelaide Plains, so Nina Marnie. And I know for Canada, if we can get Wendy to just acknowledge the lands on which she meets. You're on mute still, Wendy.
The territory I'm on is also unceded, and it's the ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, and I pay my respects to them and remember always that the land was never ceded.
Thank you, Wendy. Becky's also in Adelaide, and Emma, I don't know if you just want to quickly say which land you're on.
Yes, I'm on Gumbaynggirr people land in northern New South Wales.
Thank you very much. Global Community Engagement Day started 8 years ago as an idea when Becky and I were members of the Engage to Act board. The idea was that a recognised day would help progress the practice of community engagement with those that do it by helping them celebrate what they do. Through a poll of community engagement's greats' birthdays, a date was chosen, and 28th of January will forevermore be known as Global Community Engagement Day. And the 28th of January being that of Wendy Sarkissian, Dr. Wendy Sarkissian's birthday. So happy birthday, Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as we start Global Community Engagement Day number 7, let's first wish Wendy a happy birthday. And as Global Community Engagement Day grew over the years, we have seen country participation grow from 7 to now over 40 countries, with organizations and individuals of all shapes and sizes and persuasions now taking part. To help people take part, we, the royal we, Becky and I, set themes that always seem to be on point and resonate with the participants. This year is no exception, and came about around 6 months ago when I wrote a piece on mental health in community engagement after some very candid conversations with people in the field who were feeling very disconnected. So let's get into it. And in our first ever live Global Community Engagement Day panel, discuss disconnected, looking after our mental health in community engagement. If you haven't already searched the hashtag in LinkedIn, do so. This year's content is already so rich and on point or on theme, with blog posts from Australia, UK, America, and Canada already being presented. While I can't thank everyone for contributing individually, please do check out pieces by the fabulous Isabella Giavolva and Brooks, Sharon Sebastian, Chloe DuBois, and Steve Innes at the Consultation Institute. They're just a few that stand out already. With over 100 people signed up to either watch live or receive this recording, that Becky and I are very, very stoked. So first, let's meet the panel officially. The panel are Dr. Wendy Sarkissian from Canada, global pioneer of innovation in community engagement who seeks spirited ways to nurture and engage citizenry. Paul Vittles from the UK, research fellow, transformational change coach, counsellor, lived experience mental health advocate, and suicide prevention facilitator. Emma Broomfield, Australia, recovering lawyer turned conflict resolution specialist with a passion for connecting the dots in the democracy flywheel. Becky Hirst from Australia, frank and fearless author, keynote speaker, trainer, and doer of community engagement. And myself, Andrew Coulson, community engagement lifer and tragic. I would also like to acknowledge that apart from Paul, who is a qualified counsellor, and has certification in grief and loss, relationship, and conflict resolution counselling. None of the other panel members are professionally qualified. All of the panel will be speaking from personal experience and relate to stories that have been told. Names will only be used if permission has been given. Some of the stories may trigger memories for you. So as a disclaimer, while we will be accepting questions and engaging in chat, if you need to speak to a professional for support on any issue relating to mental health in any way, we will throughout the session be sharing regional contact details, phone numbers, etc., of well-known mental health support agencies that you can contact if needed. So to start, I do want each panel member to quickly say hello and give us an intro to your personal stories about being disconnected. I will try to keep you all to 3 minutes maximum. And I'm looking at you, Wendy and Paul. Do we have any volunteers to go first with their personal stories?
I'll go.
Go on then, Wendy.
Can you hear me okay?
We can, yep.
Okay. Good day, folks. Wendy here, and I'm chuffed to be with you today. What makes it extra special is that it's me 81st birthday, almost anyway. I'm in Vancouver, so I'm sort of bending the time a bit. Now let me spill the beans. I retired a while back, and let me tell you, it wasn't by choice. Fate threw me a real curveball in 2016 in the form of a nasty car crash. It took a big chunk of my life away, but hey, look at me now, still kicking and talking to you legends. That's a win right there. You've asked me to have a chinwag about being disconnected and looking after our mental health and community engagement, AKA wellness, and I'm all in for it. But here's the hitch. Back in the day, well, it's been a while, truth be told, I used to be this optimistic, glass half full kind of gal when it came to the Earth's future. But somewhere along the line, my crystal ball got a bit cloudy, and I've turned into a modern day Cassandra. You know, that prophet that no one took seriously. Trust me, it's not the most glamorous gig in town, but someone's got to do it. Cassandra, for those of you not up to snuff with Greek mythology, was a prophet with a twist. She had the gift of foresight, thanks to a fellow named Apollo who fancied her. She knocked him back, though, and he cursed her. She could see the future, but no one would ever believe her prophecies. Predicting the fall of Troy, yep, that was her biggie, made her a symbol of tragic irony and the frustration of being ignored. Boy, do I know how she feels. Now, if we step away from the ancient tales for a tick, Cassandra's story is a cautionary tale for today. It's all about the perils of disbelief and the muck-up that happens when you ignore valuable warnings, insights, and wisdom. So here I am, donning my metaphorical Cassandra hat and shouting from the rooftops. The way we're going about things on this earth is not doing it any favors. And guess what? This disconnected and wellness chat we're having today for Global Community Engagement Day ties into it all. I spent donkey's years running a little community engagement workshop, an outfit. And let me tell you, disconnection was a bit of a head scratcher for us. We'd wade through bucket loads of pain and strife in the communities and some of the project managers and others we worked with, all over the place, all over this wide brown land, everywhere. I mean, strife, like a bad rash in a bad place. It was like being a social worker for whole neighborhoods. People often acted out, got a bit cranky, obstinate, and just plain hard to handle. Fast forward to today, it's a bit of deja vu all over again. But things are different now. They're heaps worse. And here's the kicker. I reckon there's a good reason behind all that wonky behavior you're seeing today amongst our colleagues and in communities. Deep down, below the surface of our conscious minds, we all have this inkling. We feel it in our waters. You've heard about climate change, right? Well, the United Nations has given it a makeover. Now it's climate breakdown. Yep, we're in full-blown collapse. So when folks, like the folks you work with on your jobs or people in the communities you're working with, start acting like they're auditioning for a soap opera, losing their cool, being rude and nasty and generally being a handful, it's because they're feeling this collapse. Even if they don't fully get it, they're breaking down too. I'm not going to give you a step-by-step roadmap to fix everything, but here's an idea, especially for you community engagement whizzes. Get out into the bush more often. You don't need to go backpacking in the wild unknown. A local park, your own backyard, even a little plant on your desk can work wonders. Nature has this way of connecting us, reminding us that we're not just visitors. We're part of the big picture, part of this grand ecosystem. We're not aliens on this earth. You know, we belong right here. So while I might sound like a bit of a soothsayer of doom, my message is pretty straight up. It's good to sort the tinnies and put the stuff in the recycling, for sure. But it's even better for wellness and dealing with this disconnected thing to hug Mother Nature. And let her give you a hug back. It might not solve every mess you're in, but it's a corker of a start. Big cheers to all you legends who made this happen today, this annual get-together, this Global Community Engagement Day. It's a ripper. And I'm throwing blessings your way across the big pond for being part of it. Thanks a million. Let's get connected and keep rolling on this wellness journey. And when you find yourself between a rock and a hard place, please don't forget about Mother Earth. She's the one who gave us a fair go in the first place. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Lots of excellent points there, but we're going to keep rolling before we start discussing. And I'm going to go Emma. Let's go Emma next in Australia.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Andrew, and those wise words from you, Wendy. I'm really excited to be part of Global Community Engagement Day today and be alongside this panel of experienced practitioners. I'm a relative newcomer to the field of community engagement compared to the other guests on the panel because I started out my career as a lawyer. And I accidentally fell into the field of planning and environment and local government law. And I learned a lot about the complexities of government decision making, but I also saw how alienated communities could be in the decision making processes. And about a decade ago, I started to lose my passion for the law and really became interested in conflict resolution and particularly how communities resolve conflict within decision making. And I started to follow, I guess, what I call my breadcrumbs of interest, which led me down to the engagement path and working in particular in high conflict topics and also in issues which have a high level of conflict. And I sort of wonder why I ended up in this point, because sometimes the work can be pretty heavy and sometimes the situations that I walk into can be quite challenging. But I do love the work. And when I saw Andrew's post about the theme for this year's Global Community Engagement Day, I thought I want to reach out to Andrew and say, hey, I'd love to contribute, not only to share my professional and personal experience in what I've had to do to manage my own well-being and mental health in this space, but also to share some really insightful and impactful work that's happening at a global level, looking into the mental well-being and health of our elected leaders. So I'm going to share a little bit more about that as we go through the panel. But what I do want to say that as community engagement practitioners, a lot of the work we do is ultimately informing and helping others make decisions. We're often not the decision makers ourselves. We're the ears of our elected leaders or others who are working within government or other organisations to make decisions. So knowing the state of the mental well-being of others is so important. And I guess what I've got to say is it's not great. And so recent report from the Apolitical Foundation called the Mere Mortals Report, which was released at the end of last year, was the first of its kind report that looked into the mental well-being of our politicians across the globe. And there's some pretty shocking statistics in that report, one of which is that 40% of our elected leaders have considered not talking to their constituents. It's pretty shocking to me, given we elect those people to actually represent our communities. It also found that politicians' mental well-being is actually worse than our emergency services personnel. Also pretty shocking. So I'm going to be sharing more about the insights in that report and the work that I'm doing through my business Locale Learning to change the paradigm around that and to provide support for our elected leaders in how they engage with their communities. And I'll share a bit about my professional experience and what I do to turn up to do my best work in often high conflict, high stress environments.
Thank you very much, Emma. Quickly moving on to Becky.
Yay. Hello. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, Wendy and Emma. That's a really insightful start to the session. I thought I would start or tell you my personal story in this safe space that's being recorded and broadcast around the world. Back in 2021, I wrote my book because I've written one book, and the book is called For the Love of Community Engagement. And it really talked about my love and my passion for communities and community engagement. I've been working in communities for 25 years now. It was more like a 20-year reflection, the book, a bit of a professional memoir. I actually really enjoyed the pandemic as far as the lockdowns. I loved having to stay home. I loved the kids being home. I loved the government handouts. I loved being paid to stay home. It was just, I was in heaven in that space. And that was a big eye opener for me because I'd always been quite extrovert, quite out there, working with groups of people. So we kind of did that removal from society. And I personally enjoyed that. Business was tricky. It was kind of up and down, you know, when you're self-employed and you're a consultant working in community engagement and suddenly the world locks down, you've got that whole pivot thing that we all had to do. And so it was an emotional time, but I actually sort of thrived through that part and quit alcohol, quit drinking, which was a massive thing for my mental health. That's what cleared my mind and helped me write the book. When we emerged from the pandemic, which I really consider to be sort of like the start of last year, in my mind, it's sort of January 2023, I emerged expecting to find the same world that I'd left back in 2020 when we'd all gone down into those lockdowns. But I found communities were in quite a different place when I came back out. I almost came skipping back out of the house, you know, like, yay, let's get engaging, let's work together, this is all going to be amazing. And I found a very different place. I had two experiences in my own community, so not at all professional, just me turning up to stuff in my own community. One was a council meeting at my local council. It was a big meeting and it's all over the news. Just search South Australia council meeting stormed. It was a Trump style storming of the council chamber, and myself and my daughter were there, and it really emotionally shook me. I think partly because I wasn't in control of the situation. I wasn't there professionally. I was there just as a mum turning up to my daughter, bless her, first council meeting ever, and she certainly doesn't want to return. The second one was something I was passionate about in my community. I turned up to a public meeting and I couldn't believe the amount of shouting that happened. Now, shouting had always been happening in community meetings, but this was different. This was my local MP standing at the front of the room, shouting at the community, people who were speaking up about stuff that was important to them, shouting at me effectively and the people that I turned up with. I found what we call these shouty spaces. Kate Simpson here in South Australia coined that term. They were becoming more and more. And so this actually then overflowed into my professional life. I was working on pieces of work on some quite sort of contentious issues, and I just felt this shouting. This overtook me emotionally, and I pretty much ground to a halt. I effectively broke down. Anxiety took over. I was like a bunny in the headlights. I don't know whether it was the pandemic that had caused this, whether it was the state of the world, whether it's the climate breakdown anxiety that Wendy talked about, but I felt lost, I felt lonely, and I felt pretty disconnected, in all honesty. I disconnected myself, and I am still disconnected now from my own community because I do not want to go into those shouty spaces. And I've consciously unfollowed all of my local politicians. I want no interest in my local council. And so for me, this is alarm bells, because if you have got the author of For the Love of Community Engagement saying they don't want to engage with their community, then we have got an issue in the world of disconnection. I'm actually doing fine now. I'm really, really good. I'll talk about some of the strategies I've used. I've had some amazing clients since then, and I've gone into some communities to work where there has been so much love. So I have optimism in this, but I just thought I'd share that story as a starting point.
Thank you, Becky. And quickly over to Paul.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and thanks, Becky, for sharing that personal stuff as well. I've been sharing some personal stuff over the last few years, and more of it's coming out as I get older, and spend more time in those safe, supportive spaces, and have more people creating those safe, supportive spaces, which enable us and encourage us to speak out about our personal stuff as well. And I wrote a piece up for today. I've written a piece, a kind of memoir with life lessons, especially for Global Community Engagement Day. I'll put the link into the chat. It started off because I was reflecting on the fact that I've spent 40 years working in community engagement. So I thought, wow, that's probably worth a bit of reflection, isn't it? But as I wrote it, it was more kind of, I was feeling the mental health theme of this year's Global Community Engagement Day was worth sharing a bit more of the personal story as well as the professional stuff as well. So that's for your pleasure or your education or your entertainment or whatever you get out of that. In there are also two help and resources entries. One is a piece that I wrote up. One is a piece from the Jordan Legacy's website, the Jordan Legacy I work with at the moment. One is a piece I wrote up for the One Team Gov event on World Suicide Prevention Day 2020, which is international. It's got international resources on there as well. So lots and lots of help and resources. If anybody needs any of that, please access those sites. Please also find what's available in your own country. And here in the UK, we have something called the Hub of Hope, where you can just type in your postcode and it tells you all of the mental health and suicide prevention services available in your area, and lots of other support services as well. So it's great to have all of these services, and you should be aware of them. And if you're not aware of them, please spend a bit of time finding out. On the Jordan Legacy site, there's also the Wellbeing Support Grid, where you can check on what your wellbeing support capacity and availability is like as well. So please use all those kind of tools and learn about those tools, because our well-being is so important. A few words about my background. Yeah, when I say 40 years working in community engagement, some people know what that means, and some people have no idea what that means. But it's a mixture of research, consulting work, transformational change work, individual coaching, group coaching, train as a counsellor, etc., etc., etc. But a lot of it is about engaging with people and communities of all descriptions. And I've also written a piece about all the different types of communities there are: communities, geographical communities, communities of interest, all sorts of emerging communities, professional communities, work communities, etc., etc. Bit of history for me. Grew up in the northeast of England. Started working in research with the opinion pollsters, Murray. I was a professional nosy Parker. I went and worked in local government. I was the first research and engagement manager at City of York Council, where we did a lot of pioneering work. There's case studies of all this stuff in the piece I've written up. Ran my own consultancy, which grew from 5 to 50 people. Phenomenally successful. Everybody thought we were brilliant. Won lots of awards. I personally won lots of awards, but then had a massive case of burnout in 2003. Took myself off on holiday for a month to South Africa, which is absolutely fantastic. But if you've got burnout, a holiday doesn't solve it. So took some further steps to try and sort that out, including the rather radical step of moving to Australia, a complete lifestyle change, and had a roller coaster ride in Australia with some massive highs. I've put in my piece about being paid by Tourism Queensland to go and do research on the Whitsunday Island. So I had little experiences like that, as well as some big lowlights. Things are going pretty well. Decided to stay in Australia for a while. Got permanent residency. Got citizenship. and set up my own business, and I was out doing work with small and medium-sized enterprises, and then my dad died, and I crashed again and had severe depression. And I remember the doctor saying to me, "You've got severe depression," and he said, "You look shocked," and I said, "I am," and he said, "Did you not think you had depression?" And I said, "No, I knew I thought I had depression. It's the severe word that you put in front of that that has concerned me," and that led to all sorts of dark places. But I've come through, a whole life journey, which I'm happy to talk about, and I've ended up working in suicide prevention. And when I go to conferences these days, and people say, "What business are you in?" I say, "I'm in the suicide prevention business," which gets an interesting conversation going. Some people engage in that and lean in, some run away because they're scared to even talk about suicide and suicide prevention. I had my first experience of suicide loss in 1980. I can talk about that as well. I had my most recent suicide loss in losing a family member in August 2020. It's all around us. I do research into suicide. 2 in 3 people are exposed to suicide. It's just that 2 in 3 people don't talk about it. And I put a LinkedIn post up today, finally. Andrew will be pleased to hear me say the word finally. I put up a LinkedIn post today about a little lesson I've learned when I go to these business conferences and people say, "What business are you in?" Because you're always defined by your job and your business rather than who you are. And that's a problem in itself. Because I don't want people to run away, I want to try and get them to lean in and engage and talk about mental health and suicide prevention. So when they say to me now, "What business are you in?" I say, "I'm in the hope business." And they say, "The what? Did you say the hope business?" I said, "Yes, I'm in the business of hope." And that leads to a very interesting conversation.
Thank you very much, Paul. And thank you everyone for introducing themselves to the people at home watching. I'll very briefly say a little bit about myself as well. I have also been in community engagement for quite a long time, around 22 years now. I think combined, the panel has been in community engagement for over 160 years. I think I tried to work it out earlier. So there's a lot of experience here. And one of the things that I've noticed of working in community engagement, and this will be the first question as well, is that there has been a slight shift in the decline of the decorum of the public, which is something that Jeff Wilson pointed out on one of the LinkedIn posts. I think Jeff's actually in watching, so thank you, Jeff. And certainly from my experience, I've been quite lucky. I've only experienced serious bad behavior in community engagement sessions twice. And where I say serious bad behavior, that's when the police have been called in and had to break up, get rid of people out of a room and sort out what's going on. And I think when you're working in community engagement for such a long time, planning community engagement up front is really, really important, because one of the biggest fears, not just for the organization that you're working for, but for yourself, is how is it going to go? Is there going to be a backlash? You are essentially and effectively being the face of an organization in front of an angry mob a lot of the time. So yeah, I've had a couple of experiences like Becky where police have been involved, and it does bring up those questions of, what am I doing? Should I be doing this? Am I the right person? There's quite a famous project in Australia called the St Kilda Triangle in the Port Phillip area of Melbourne, which actually did bring out some very interesting stories. And if you Google that and go onto YouTube, there is a very short video called it's a trailer of a longer film called the St Kilda Triangle Wars. And literally about 1 minute into that trailer for that film, there is a lady screaming her head off at elected members, and there's another person dumping what looks like an empty coffin on the I think it's the mayor's desk in a council meeting, all around community engagement going bad basically and not being planned correctly. So that is going to lead to the first question, thanks to Jeff. Has there been an increasing decline in the decorum in the public sphere when it comes to community engagement. And Becky is going to go first.
I want to get in first just to say yes. I think it's a bigger thing than just a decline in the decorum. I think there's obviously the era of keyboard warriorism that's happened. You know, social media has played a big part. I think there's the stuff that Wendy's talked about, that people are just generally more anxious. There's a lot of media messaging coming at us. There is this, I put a lot of what we've been witnessing in communities, and I'll add here, as community engagement professionals, we are sitting here as the face of community engagement. So we're often in front of this, trying to do our kind of balancing act of hearing all the views. But there is huge polarization going on in our society. There seems to be, from what I can tell, this inability to meet in the middle. There seems to be this, we go either for that side or that side. And so now more than ever, I just believe that we need to learn to have conversations again. And there was an amazing event. Somebody might be watching in. I shared it. I think it was on Instagram. It was actually a political event where they brought people together of different persuasions to have conversations, to learn to actually listen to each other's side of, you know, point of view. We need to learn to do that again. So yes, is my answer to that one.
Thank you, Becky. Any other thoughts, Emma, working directly with elected members?
I was going to say, I find this question hard to answer in the sense that I often am dealing in high conflict situations. So I think I tend to see the worst of it. So sometimes that does affect my optimism. But I do think, yes, there is a decline in the decorum, and there's an intrinsic link between what's happening in the online space and the real world, which is interesting in itself, because there's disconnection there, but there's that bleed over of what's happening online into in person. And only just last week, I had a counsellor share with me that she was reporting 8 different people for online abuse towards her online. And that's just one story from one counsellor. And certainly Becky shared her story about the disruption of council meetings. That's a phenomenon that's happening across the whole of Australia. That's not just a one-off, and councils are actively managing that as a risk, particularly in terms of how that impacts the well-being of elected members, but also staff and also members of the public who may be part of that experience as well. And so, yes, I would say, yes, I would agree there's probably a decline, but it's pretty complex, and to unpack all of that, I think would take some time. And I can see Wendy's got her hand up to say a few words here too.
Yep, go on, Wendy.
What I'm picking up, not in the actual face-to-face engagement world, but from other people, is there's also a huge intergenerational gulf, chasm, potential conflict emerging here, where the younger people are the ones who are suffering from climate anxiety and climate grief more dramatically than older people. And basically they're blaming us, particularly the baby boomers. That's me. I'm a pre-boomer, actually. I was born during the war. They're blaming us for trashing their planet. It used to be that they were blaming us for house prices and they couldn't crack into the home ownership market. Now they're blaming us. Extinction Rebellion is blaming us for trashing the planet. So I think, again, you know, as above, so below, we've got these conflicts going on about the global situation that are intergenerational. They're certainly intercultural. Right? Not everybody in every community is having conversations like these, but the fractures are there at the global scale as well.
Thank you, Wendy. Paul's got his hand up.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the question that was posed there, and I'm not sure if it's getting worse or has got worse, just on the basis that it was pretty bad when I started doing this kind of stuff 40 years ago. And people used to shout at each other then. It's just that they didn't have the internet to do it then. So some things have changed and some things haven't changed. Also, when I first went to work in local government, I went and met with a bunch of counsellors, and most of them had no skills whatsoever or training in communication or listening to people or engaging with people. And there was quite a big turnover of counsellors. So they never really kind of developed those skills or that experience. So I used to go to meetings with them and you know, things around traffic schemes, traffic calming schemes and things like that. They had no idea how to handle a crowd. And so everybody would start shouting at each other, but it wasn't political. It was just human beings without the skills to actually have conversations with other human beings. I remember once when there was death threats for the chair of the Highways Committee with one traffic calming scheme, and they put about 400 humps in this particular area, and there was a campaign group called CATH, Campaign Against the Humps. And every time you knocked on the door, they'd tell you how many humps it was to get to the supermarket and how many humps it was to take the kids to school. So they'd kind of really wound the community up. So everybody was arguing with each other, but we worked with those communities and used our skills, our community engagement skills, to calm the whole thing down. And like, for instance, in York, we introduced a policy where no scheme was introduced until there'd been a survey where all of the community had to be asked if there was a problem to be solved. So, you know, is there a traffic problem in this area? If yes, is it speed of traffic, volume of traffic, safe places to cross the road, whatever? And it was only when everybody agreed on the problem to be solved that we started the work on designing the scheme to design the solution. And then in this other area where there was this almost riot, advisory groups of residents and professionals together were set up, and there was a rolling scheme. So there'd always be some people from the previous scheme on the new advisory group, and then a few would move on to the next advisory group. So the sting was taken out of all these things. But, you know, we can design these things out. And finally, I'll just say, I could go on forever on this, but one more point. Why do we design our political systems to argue with each other? Why do we design our chambers to be adversarial chambers so that we're meant to fight with each other? Why do we have set up systems to focus on the things that divide us rather than things that unite us? You know, so all these things can be designed out of the system. So I don't blame the politicians. I don't blame human beings who just don't, as they don't have the toolkits to be able to deal with this stuff. And I think they've all shouted at each other. They've just been given extra tools like the internet to shout more often, to shout louder, to find new ways of shouting. They're still shouting at parked cars most of the time.
Thank you, Paul. A couple of you mentioned there that introduction, obviously, of the internet. It's really not that old. I think Paul's been working in community engagement, and Wendy longer than the internet. So what is the difference between community engagement on and offline, and the effect on mental health, for example, keyboard warriors? Anybody want to take that one?
I'll go first if you like here. I've received hate messages from people within the industry. I'm known to be quite outspoken on thoughts. I'll just express one here. I hate the expression "have your say," and I wrote that in the book. I go for a more kind of collaborative. I want a bit more of an inclusive phrase, and "have your say" is the world's most overused tagline, in my opinion. And I've received messages of hate from people within the sector. Fellow community engagement practitioners have messaged me telling me their disgust in me individually. Nobody has said that to me in person. I'll just leave that one there. They've done it online.
I mean, I work in the digital space now. For many of you that know me, obviously I worked face-to-face community engagement for a very long time, but for the last 4 years, I've now worked in the digital space. And obviously Becky and I have had this conversation, and I'm on Becky's side with the have your say thing. It's quite interesting that for one of the products that I work with, Social Pinpoint, quite a few of the customers that we have now are actually in discussions around how they actually move away from that have your say URL to something different, because they just don't see that value in it anymore. So that is certainly part of the conversation. But one of the things that I do notice, and having worked in the local government sector and state government sector, is that the keyboard does break down. You know, people will just say whatever they want to say in an online space. And whilst most digital engagement tools have a good filter when it comes to swear words, etc., people do work out how to get around those things. And those messages still come through, and people still read them at the other side. So people like Becky or myself or whoever is analysing those comments, they're actually reading those things, and some of them do feel quite personal. And I know, Becky, you as well, in a project where stuff was shared on Facebook, and I hope you don't mind me sharing this, you were personally attacked through some of those posts on Facebook. Even though it's a project run by someone else, you were the facilitator, and it was you that bore the brunt of those comments. Yeah. I think Paul was slightly quicker with his hand up before Emma, so I'll let Paul go first.
Yeah, I won. So yeah, I mean, things change. I was doing a talk last week on transformational change, actually, and things that change around us. And I talked about the research, how the research world and community engagement world has changed. When I first started working in research, not only did we not have the internet, but most surveys were face-to-face. They took weeks or months to analyze data and publish. Nowadays, of course, it's online and you get results within 24 hours. And so, yeah, the methods available are changing. Again, people get angry. People used to get angry back then. When I worked in housing, I remember somebody threw a dead rat at me once. So they had ways of getting their messages across if they wanted to get their messages across. But we have these opportunities now again to communicate in different ways and use the tools. I started using online forums in 2008 when it was pretty radical then. And so, fantastic tools for engagement. But interestingly, I'm on various research forums where I see people researchers talking about research methods. And a lot of researchers say, I'm doing this online community and we want to get people to engage for 2 hours a week, or we want to get people to engage, for a period of 2 weeks to get all this information out of them, which is data extraction, really, not community engagement. And they say, well, you can't really get people engaged for too long because people won't do it. Their attention spans are too short. This is the generation where people won't watch anything longer than 30 seconds and all this stuff. Well, during lockdown, in the first lockdown, I ran 3 online forums for a place in London called King's Place, which is an arts and music foundation, not-for-profit foundation. And they were threatened with not surviving at all because they were shut down by the first lockdown. And so they wanted to look at how they could survive. So I set up 3 online forums and got a group of older people, younger people, middle-aged people on these 3 forums. And we started engaging to find out how we could get through lockdown together. And we ran those forums for 9 months. People engaged on those forums every single day for 9 months. So, if you do this stuff properly, that's what you can achieve. We started off, just again, I'm trying to keep this all very brief. We started, this would be a case study in itself. We started off by saying, what would you like to get from King's Place? And they said, oh, we're missing all the live concerts. We're missing the live concerts. Give us live concerts online. So we gave them live concerts online. And then after a few weeks, they said, oh, this is depressing. This is just reminding us all the things that we can't do and all the things that we can't see. So we said, what would help now? And they said, oh, can you give us, documentaries about music? Can you give us online guitar lessons or something we can do? So we just kept a continuous conversation going like that for 9 months. And we got through lockdown and King's Place is thriving.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. And Emma, very briefly, because I want to move on to the next question.
So I just wanted to say that I agree with the observations around there being a difference between engagement online and in person, but just to really draw people's attention to some really great resources which are available on the E-Safety Commissioner's website in Australia, because we also know from the research that they've done recently that when in the online space that there are segments of our community, probably also from a professional sense, engagement practitioners who may be subject to more online abuse or harm. And the E-Safety Commissioner has done some really great research, in particular for women who are professionally online. And they've got a whole stack of tools that you can use to manage those risks for yourself from a professional point of view, which people may find beneficial, particularly in managing their own mental health. So I'll pop the link to that in the chat as well.
Thank you, Emma. And Wendy's popped her hand up.
Yes, this time I'm not Cassandra. I'm the Earth Mother speaking here. I just want to remind us, while we're dealing with these very contentious issues around online engagement, that humans are animals. Just in case you hadn't remembered that you're an animal, you're an animal. I remember a wonderful debate in the Australian Parliament a few years back where Bronwyn Bishop came to Parliament wearing a fur stole. And Bob Brown went completely ballistic about it and told her that it wasn't good for one animal to be wearing the skin of another animal. And she said, I'm not an animal. And he said, so are you mineral or vegetable? Right. And I always wished I'd had the capacity that Bob Brown had in that moment, but we're animals. And those of us who've done a lot of face-to-face engagement, and there are quite a few people here who have, know that you can smell it in the room. You can come in the door and you go, oh no, oh, okay. And I remember my late husband saying to me once, the first time he went to an engagement with me in Perth, he came up to me and he said, I think you're in trouble. And I said, come on, Carl, I'm the world's greatest expert here. I've got this completely under control. And he said, listen to me, Wendy, I'm only a welder boiler maker and you're in trouble. And I said, what's happening? And he said, they're so angry, they won't take name tags. Mm-hmm. And I was in trouble, all right, totally in trouble, right? And he had the nous to pick up. If somebody won't even take a name tag at the front desk, you're in trouble. So one of the things that's happened with the online space is that we're not being animals. We can't smell, we can't see that glint in your eye. You can't, you know, the sense that you come into a room and you go, oh, good, expectation, or oh, shit, not expectation, right? Like negativity and so on. And this is part of the global thing. We are disconnected. So you're feeling disconnected because you are. And the skills that we had as engagement practitioners to read a room, to sense it, to get the vibe, very difficult now.
Thank you, Wendy. Very good points there. I do want to kind of move on. We've got a few more questions that I'd like to try and get through. One of them being the big C word and the impact of COVID on the process. Yeah, Becky, come on. On the process of community engagement leading to mental health issues. Post-COVID, is it harder than it was before? Open to the room.
I'll just go first just to quickly duck in to say, I think I've already said, I believe it is, although now listening to Paul and Wendy and talk about it used to always be hard, I'm actually wondering if maybe it's not the community that's changed, maybe it's us as a profession has changed. Maybe me at 25 years in is tired and exhausted and kind of tired that people are still kind of like this. So yeah, I think I thought it had changed since COVID, but maybe it hasn't. Maybe we were always like this. Animals, Wendy, we're animals.
Paul?
Yeah, I'll just be very brief on this one. When we went to the first lockdown, I found it a time of absolutely fascinating study of people and of where people behave. We in our local area, we had people putting leaflets through our doors, setting up new communities, setting up next door communities online, supporting each other. Workforces, you know, people saying there were people checking in with them for in ways they'd never done before, you know, checking if they were okay. I mean, it was just a real period of heightened interest in mental health. We also heard about how councils and government departments have been blocked from using all sorts of online tools because they weren't safe and secure and they weren't allowed to use Zoom and things like that. But now they're being released into the wild, and all sorts of wonderful things changed. And we did a project on how democracy changed and how council meetings were taking place online and so on. There was the famous parish council meeting that went viral with everybody shouting at each other and made celebrities of parish councillors. But a lot of that's gone backwards because the legislation was just temporary changes to allow online meetings, and it's all gone backwards. So that's a bit disappointing.
Emma?
Just to build on those comments, I do think it has changed, and I do want to add, in the context of Australia in particular, not only have we had COVID to deal with, but we've had a series of unprecedented natural disasters, and the communities that I work in are primarily regional communities, and they have borne the brunt of disaster after disaster combined with COVID in the last 4 years. And so really for me, it's not just COVID and floods and bushfires have all played a role. And what I see, not only in communities, but also with the clients that I work with and the elected leaders that I work with, is a collective tiredness I think people are really tired, and I've felt that, and I've really had to learn how to manage myself so that I'm able to turn up and do that work without being tired. And so I know we're going to get into some questions about personal strategies, but that, I think, is my experience, and I see that happening with everyone that I'm working with too, and it's still there, in my opinion. We're not over it yet.
And that certainly kind of leads on. I've got a couple of more questions I did want to get to. We're kind of running out of time, but Jenny Zinestra from City of Greater Geelong asked me to ask you about mental health with staff, but also the community and community mental health, and the role of engagement fatigue. And I think Emma kind of just answered that there is that general tiredness across everyone, not just the staff, but also the community, with the amount of engagement that does happen.
Andrew, can I just interject there just
Sure.
quickly to say I had tears just last week in one of my lovely positive sessions. And it was relating to, here in Australia, our First Nations people have suffered so much and are so tired and have, had such a massive time with our referendum around the voice and it not getting through. And those tears, whilst it was in a positive space, there were still tears of frustration, and it is totally that exhaustion, tiredness. Yeah, people are tired.
And sorry, the final question that I kind of had from people who on LinkedIn contributed to some of the posts that we did, is around employers, and do employers offer enough support or training around mental health, more than just one day a year, where they, and that no disrespect to Are You OK Day in Australia, but are employers doing enough to support people who work in this practice? Paul?
Yeah, I'll actually double up and answer both questions you've asked there, Andrew, because I actually challenge people when they talk about consultation fatigue or engagement fatigue, because I've never, ever known, in the 40 years I've been doing this, I've never known a community or a group of people be fatigued by being appropriately and effectively listened to, given appropriate and effective feedback, seeing action being taken on the basis of that feedback and wanting to go again. I've never seen anybody fatigued by that. So that's one point I want to get across. By the way, another thing as well is, at one point in my career, I've had two periods of burnout. First one I've already mentioned, but the second one, I was actually diagnosed with something called compassion fatigue, which I thought was an interesting concept. So I had to research what that was. Once you're diagnosed with something, you have to do a lot of research. These days, you might do your own research because the health services can't keep up. But I then had a psychologist who told me that didn't exist. Compassion fatigue didn't exist. It's actually empathy fatigue. We have an endless supply of compassion, but we don't have an endless supply of empathy. So these things are very, very challenging. On an employer basis, what I come across in my work, the full extreme. I come across employers that are absolutely incredible in terms of these days, in terms of their mental health support, access to counselling, access to peer support groups, mental health first aid, flexible working, checking in on people's mental health all the time. And I've got the other extreme of people who do zilch, do absolutely nothing, in fact, do harm, cause harm. And I actually had the misfortune of dealing with an employer in Australia where somebody faced with a bullying harassment claim, bullying harassment experience, who went to the HR department for support, was told by the HR department, you can take out a complaint, but your life will never be the same again, which I think is the definition of a psychologically unsafe workplace, if that's the reaction you get from your HR department. So you get the full extreme, right? From brilliant to terrible. But I also like to shout out at this point, what about the people who aren't working? What about the people who lose their jobs? What about the people who face redundancy? These people are left out in the cold, and the more workplaces get better at supporting people's mental health, the worse it is for people who are no longer employed. Because they often go from an environment where they are getting a lot of support and access to EAP and counselling and everything, and then they lose their jobs and they get nothing. And they are people we really need to do something. We need to do better to give wraparound care to those people who are at heightened risk of suicide, by the way.
Thank you, Paul. I did want to discuss there, and I don't think we've got enough time, but there's community engagement world is often very short-term contract. There's a lot of restructures, especially in local and state government, that happen on a very regular basis, and it does affect people's mental health. I did speak to one person over a year ago who'd been through 7 in 8 years restructures and survived 6, and then finally lost in the 7th. So that kind of thing is going to, affect work and mental health as you're going through. Now, we only have 4 minutes left. I did want to talk. I'll get people to talk about strategies and coping.
We're not going on till 11, or is it?
We can keep going and going and going.
I thought the invite was 9:30. Sorry, I thought it was an hour and a half. Sorry.
I think
I can stay here till 11. I can stay here.
We've put in a little bit of extra time. I do, for the audience, want to keep it to an hour, but those people that want to stay on for a little bit longer are more than welcome. There is one final question, which was around coping strategies, and I want to try and build in Victor Parton's question into this one as well, which is what makes the panelists optimistic as well. So any coping strategies and optimism? Wendy's first.
So the big coping strategy, and you'll be happy to know that this is evidence-based and not just the Earth Mother speaking, is to bring nature into everything. There's really good evidence that you'll recover quicker from dental surgery if the dentist has a photograph of a natural environment on the wall. It's as basic as this. This is about nature deficit disorder and this whole discourse that's come from the work of Louvre. So bring nature into the environments that you're working in. Find ways that the group can go and spend, 20 minutes in the local park, put a lot of nature. Look at Becky's office, right? Natural light, plants everywhere. Those spider plants are fabulous for taking pollution and electronic pollution out of the air. But nature wants to heal the alienated human. That's the whole thing. So if you just reach out, you'll get the benefits back. And if there's some way to bring nature into the actual engagement processes without it being irrelevant, try to do it wherever you can, because it's the helping hand. It's the mother is at home feeling that everybody's missing here.
I'm on mute, Paul.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for the question, Victor, and nice to see you. Nice to engage with you again here. Optimism, I've always found it an interesting thing. I remember a phrase from my workshops I used to use years ago, which is the difference between the optimist and the pessimist. The optimist believes that this is the best of all possible worlds, and the pessimist fears that that's true. We live in a world where we need to try and keep people optimistic, and I would tend to use the word hopeful. I grew up with another phrase that I used to be taught, that where there's life, there's hope. But I sadly discovered that wasn't true either when I started working with people with severe mental illness and people in suicidal crisis. So we flip that around nowadays and we say where there's hope, there's life. And we spend all our time trying to give people hope. So you might call it optimism, you might call it hope, whichever way to do it. And when I was CEO, people used to call me a hopeless optimist. And I used to say, actually, I'm a hopeful optimist. But I used to then start counselling people who were in crisis, and they were hopeless pessimists. And if we could get them from a hopeless pessimist to a hopeful pessimist, that was progress. So all this stuff has challenged me throughout my career. But I would say I would use the word hope. And even in the worst moments of the work I now do in suicide prevention, even when I see the most horrific things and hear the most horrific stories, we agree that there is hope in the fact there's things we can do. There's hope in the fact there are actions we can take to change the situation.
Thank you, Paul. very briefly, we are now on the hour. So thank you all for joining us. However, I do think that the panelists will stick around for a little bit longer. So we'll keep recording. We'll keep going for a little bit longer. If you have to leave, don't worry. We are recording. We will send the recording out to all those that have registered. But Wendy had her hand up, so we'll keep going.
Okay, Paul, I don't agree with you. I absolutely don't agree with you. I think that in terms of us coming to grips with the global situation, we've got to have a serious look at hope. And I recommend people looking at Michael Shaw's new film, Living in the Time of Dying. Shaw is his first film. He lives in Brunswick Heads in Australia. And he talked to 4 people about the state of the world. And it's a powerful, very sensitive new film. The earth is dying, folks. The earth is dying. The earth's capacity to support life, including human life, is compromised so that now the UN is calling it breakdown. Could we please clean up our language? And I think what we have to do is we have to find a way to get out of denial. In my business, as an engagement practitioner, denial and collusion to deny were the 2 things we worked in my business. And it drove us nuts, totally nuts. But the earth is at the moment unable to continue to support human life. So we got to be really careful with hope, because in their core fiber of their being, when you talk about hope, people know at a deep level it's not true.
Thank you, Wendy and Emma.
Wow, I'm going to follow on from from that comment from Wendy.
I thought we were going to leave that to the end as well.
That's I'm going to follow on from that and build on what Wendy had said, and say that, you know, that feeling, or what Wendy's just described, I do encounter that in the communities that I work with, particularly in working in post-disaster engagement, where people have experienced natural disasters and do have a sense of hopelessness, and they do have a profound fear about where they're going to live in the future. Am I safe? You know, that question, am I safe? And I've encountered that a lot in the last few years. And for me, that's been hard to take on and carry in an engagement space, and to balance that. And so for me, one of the strategies, just coming back to the question that Andrew asked about the strategies that we use, I mean, for me, what I do, I imagine myself being a big sponge, and the opposite of filling your cup. You know, you often hear people say you need to fill your cup and do the things that you love, which is great, all for that, do that. But for me, I see myself as a sponge, and I get heavier and heavier with that water, and eventually my sponge is so full with those feelings that I'm absorbing from different places that I need to wring it out, and I can feel that in my body. And so picking up on Wendy's comments before about being animals and sensing that in our real life engagements, if you tune into your body as well, you'll feel that as well when you're at capacity, and your mental well-being might be at capacity. So the 3 things that work for me is really quite simple: moving my body. I have to do it. I have to wring my sponge out by moving my body. Debriefing, having someone that I trust that I can talk to share my own experience is critical to be able to stay well. And thirdly, having a really deliberate practice about being intentional when I turn up in spaces. So I'm in a positive mindset, and I'm walking into those spaces with the internal strength to manage whatever comes up and whatever happens. Are the 3 strategies that I use. And what gives me optimism, I think I just believe that we can make change as human beings. And we do have the power within each of us to have hard conversations and come up with new solutions. And I am optimistic about that. And I don't know why. Maybe that's just a bit of the stupidity, but I do believe that. And I think together we can do amazing things if we turn our mind to it. So that's my thoughts on that, Andrew.
Excellent, Emma. Very good point. And I know Becky wants to say something, but she can't put her hand up, so I'm going to throw to Becky.
I don't know why I haven't haven't got a raise hand button, but it's probably doing you all a favor because I'd be keep raising my hands. I think it's because I'm the host. For some reason, I haven't. So sorry, Paul. I'm just jumping in just to say my personal coping strategy. I have a number of them. One is talk to your GP, actually. If you are feeling foggy, if you are feeling overwhelmed, personally, I talk to my GP. I have a great psychologist. Personality types are all part of this. You know, you need to get the support that's right for you, and there is support out there. But for me, the number one thing is switching off. A friend of mine that doesn't work in the sector reminds me, he says, Becky, every time you do a piece of work for a client, you're effectively writing a PhD thesis style report, you know, of what we heard. And because a lot of us in this profession are naturally empathetic, we're naturally wanting to take it all in, like Emma talked about, with that sponge, aren't we? We're taking it all in. I really think we've got the world, the weight of the world on our shoulders. And so I find that even though it feels really privileged and really selfish, sometimes I just have to totally switch off from the world. And I'll use a quick example of last time there was a US presidential election. My partner and I, it was a week out before the final announcement would be made. We decided to switch off from all media, not allowed to look online, not allowed to listen to the radio, not allowed to watch TV. And a week later, we dialed back into it all, and the same news was going around. There was nothing new. There still wasn't an announcement, but we'd saved ourselves that grief of the stuff that comes from the media. So switching off totally. And I'm with you, Wendy, immersing yourself in nature. And I'll do a quick plug. You lucky people can come and join me and Wendy later this year at my place to be amongst my birds, to listen to Wendy's book, Creek Song, and immerse ourselves in nature, but more on that separately. My optimism is this Global Community Engagement Day. Andrew and I are so proud that we picked a theme that clearly has resonated hugely amongst our profession. And I think this is just the start. Reading the blog posts has helped me personally so much, just knowing that talking about it's scary to stand up in front of a group of community and try and get them to reach a consensus. That's a horrible thing. And that pressure on us to talk about it is half the solution. Yeah.
Thank you, Becky. Paul?
Yeah, I just wanted to come back in and obviously rise to the challenge that Wendy's thrown out there. And I think climate change is a particular issue that kind of stands outside a lot of these other issues that we're talking about. When I was talking about hope earlier, it was in the context of especially individual people. And because I deal with so many people in suicidal crisis, people are in that crisis when they feel there's no hope. There is no hope. There are no options. They feel trapped. They think suicide is their only option. And so, you know, that's why I might say it tongue in cheek, we're in the hope business, but it's a serious thing. We are in the hope business. We're in the business of trying to give people hope. And I grew up in Teesside in the northeast of England in the 80s, early 80s. We had an attack, basically an ideological attack on our area, where all the factories were closed down, the shipyards, the steelworks, the mines, the chemical plants were decommissioned, and all the apprenticeship schemes were removed. So I describe it as a community being systemically de-hoped by the government. That's the way I see it. And you know, and you know, when Margaret Thatcher died, everybody turned out in huge numbers to turn their back on her coffin. That's how deep it ran in the northeast of England. But a lot of those people took their own lives. Blokes who previously were seen as resilient, hard, tough blokes, had coped with just about everything, who felt they had a job for life, suddenly didn't have a job, and they didn't have a life. So a lot of suicides at that time. And those who didn't take their own lives, a lot of them went to work on oil rigs, or they went out to construction sites in Germany, or they joined the British Army, went to Northern Ireland, and they just died later. So that is what happens when you systemically de-hope a community. And thankfully that economic policy does not happen these days, because everybody, including the Conservative Party, have realised that's not the way to run a government, a society, an economy, or a society. But it's different for something like climate change. I think climate change is really hard for people because a lot of people are running out of hope. A lot of people are feeling that we're past the point where actions can be taken to turn the situation around. A lot of young people feel as if, you know, older people feel there's nothing to do in their lifetime. Younger people feel that the planet's being killed, as Wendy's being said. And I just say that somewhere you've got to find hope. I mean, otherwise, again, you know, what do you do? If there is no hope whatsoever, where does that lead you to? So what action can you take? And I think it's fascinating now to look at what's happening in climate change, climate action, where you've got direct action not only taking place more and more and more, but more people of all generations accepting that that is inevitable, that it has to happen. There is no other way, because every other option seems to be closed down. We've now got people like Chris Packham, who has been a leading environmentalist, TV presenter, presents the Spring Watch, Winter Watch type programs, all the BBC's programs. He's just done a documentary on should I be breaking the law? Has it got to the point where me presenting TV programs and trying to educate people and trying to advocate and campaign peacefully, has it got to the point now, because of the changes that we need, that people like myself and David Attenborough should be breaking the law and going to prison? What do we have to do to get a change? But there's still got to be hope there, because we don't want climate activists just giving up, killing themselves because they've got no hope. We need everybody alive and well and thinking of what we need to do individually and collectively to make this change. And I remember when I was in Australia, I remember one of the most horrific things I've ever heard, which was when people were being put in offshore detention and given no hope, again, being systemically de-hoped. And when the health authorities finally got permission to go to Nauru and Manus Island and look at those people there and look at the suicides that were there, they came back and said there were 13 cases of resignation syndrome. This was adults and children as young as 13 with resignation syndrome. They'd given up on life. They didn't even have the energy to kill themselves. Now, that is what is happening with a lot of people around the world because of climate change and our lack of commitment, our lack of capability, our lack of will to do something about it. So I think Wendy and I have probably got more in common than divides us on these things, but I'm just trying to get across that at an individual level, you must have hope. At a community level, you must have hope. At a national level, a global level, we must have hope. We just got to find a way to have hope and the action that will get us that hope and maintain that hope.
Thank you, Paul. Emma?
I just wanted to build on what Paul said about hope and to share a positive story of community engagement that I've been involved in the last few years, which relates directly to the issue of climate change. And I had the privilege of working with some communities in northern New South Wales, in Nimbin and the Channon area, which, if you know Australia at all, those communities are highly engaged, active communities who are at the forefront of driving change within their communities in this issue. And I had a privilege of working alongside both of those communities to develop community-led resilience plans in response to the disasters that they had been experiencing. And those projects were honestly one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had in engagement, because those communities knew or know what's happening. They were deeply committed to making change at a local level within their communities. And these are small communities of hundreds, thousands of people, little communities, and they're making a difference in their little part of the world. And I found that incredibly motivating and an example of engagement working its best, where communities are leading their own communities to create solutions for the future.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. It's quite interesting, and I can see you got your hand up, Becky. I just want to throw in there that one of the organizations that I've had the privilege of working with through digital engagement is around bushfire recovery in Victoria, and it's an online space, but it's led by the community. So they actually have community volunteers running the project pages and obviously overseen by an organization, but they're empowered to do that in the online space through training and setting up those projects to ensure that it's really hyper local engagement, which there should be a blog out next week by the company that I work for, and one of the trends for 2024 is more and more hyper-local engagement coming through. Becky?
Yeah, just building on that hyperlocal and the stuff Emma was saying about those small communities, for me, that's given me hope. I think in when the world feels overwhelming and you want to change the world and you want to fix it and you want to save the world, you actually have to pull it right back. It was actually Angela Haysbrook here in Adelaide. I went on a nature retreat with her last year during my time of breakdown, and she talked about, you know, just find the one thing you can do that is going to contribute something small to the planet. And that for me, for my mental health, was incredible. You can't fix everything, but you can do your one thing. And if everybody just does that one thing, there is absolute hope.
Thank you. I'm going to try and wind things up now because people are starting to drop off. But there's one last comment I want to raise. Thanks to Josh for putting this in the chat. He's obviously, if you don't know Josh, Joshua Stokes works very much with young people. Thank you for wearing one of our t-shirts as well, Josh. He would love to know, and what I want each panel member to do is just one very quick, how would you stay optimistic when processes that you work with, and so he's working with young people where they've put together a deputation, that things are moving really slowly. How does he help those young people stay optimistic? One final point each, please.
Do you want me to go first, as I can't put my hand
Becky.
up? I'll let the others put their hands up. I really don't know. What I'm thinking, though, is that we must be super conscious of our own baggage and our own cynicism and our own exhaustion when we work with young people. They haven't yet got that. They haven't got the cynicism that we're shrouded by. And so I guess we just have to embrace that and let them create their own journey. And yeah, I think that's my advice is don't cloud them with our exhaustion.
Thank you, Becky. Wendy?
Yes, I think the trick is the intergenerational communication. So in the first weekend in May, 3rd to the 5th, I'm co-facilitating with Gilbert Rochecoste from Village Well and Mike Moritz, a 3-day event on climate anxiety and climate grief. And our intention is to have young people initially present to the participants, people from Extinction Rebellion and other groups in Melbourne, their views about the situation of the earth, to try and ground the participants in the reality, not only of people's fears and anxieties and perceptions, but also the intergenerational nature of this and how we have to work together for whatever time we have left. I do want to say back to Paul that I greatly honor your perspectives, Paul, and I agree with them all. And the only part that worries me is that we must constantly be remembering the fragility of the source of life, because there is no other earth for us. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Emma?
So great question, Josh. And my thoughts on this is we need to listen, number one. We need to listen to what young people are saying to us, and we need to take their concerns seriously. Often young people can be a really hard segment of our community to engage with. So when they are talking and sharing what they've got to say about whatever issue it is, we just have to listen. And I think too often they don't get listened to. So it sounds so simple, but I think it's really important.
Thank you, Emma. And Paul, your blog from last night or this morning actually had a section on there on listening. I did want to talk about that, but please, people, go and read Paul's very lengthy career blog. But there's a section in there about listening, which I think is really, really important, because it actually focuses on that. We all talk about the fact that we've got the skill of listening, but there's a moment in your career where you actually realize what that means. And certainly I can pinpoint that moment in my career where I really understood what listening means. And I'll let Paul have a say here, because I know Paul's got some thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I was going to make another point, but I'll just quickly say on listening that it is absolutely transformational. I think it's the most important skill to learn. I managed to win the TEDx Sydney award in 2010 for the best idea worth spreading for the campaign we did, Listen Here, the global campaign for effective listening. And what we did is we did an audit of 28 countries around the world, and we went into schools, colleges, universities, workplaces, and we audited their communication skills training programs. And they had writing, reading, creative writing, speed reading, public speaking, just about everything apart from listening. Nobody was teaching skills in how to listen, which was crazy. But anyway, as a result of that research and that campaign, we got entire university courses and degree courses in listening skills. So it's about the willingness to listen now, as well as the ability. So that's on listening, please. Yeah, every time anybody is unhappy, suffering with their mental health, in suicidal crisis, they will always say they're not being listened to. When everybody is when people are healthy, when people think that they're on the upside, on the upslope, they will often say, at last somebody is listening to me. Listening is that important. But the point I was going to finish on in terms of young people and so on, I work with young people. We try and give them case studies of hope, which I've tried to weave into my memoir with life lessons document that I've circulated. We try and show them where things have changed. And again, climate action is the most difficult one because it's so hard to demonstrate the change, and it's so hard for anybody to feel that they can influence it. But in most cases, you can show people how they can change things. And we're doing that at the moment with suicide prevention. And what we're doing is we're trying to get people to look at micro changes that lead to a macro change. If you take people and you say, in Australia, 3,000 preventable suicide deaths every year. In the UK, 6,000 plus preventable suicide deaths in the UK. At a national level, nobody feels they can do anything about it. It's too hard. It's too big a number. Nobody's prepared to take responsibility. Nobody's prepared to be accountable at a national level. But if you go to a local level and you go to an individual school or an individual community or an individual hospital or an individual employer, and you say, provocatively say, what's your target for suicide deaths in the next 12 months? To be deliberately provocative, what is your target for suicide deaths in the next 12 months? They'll say, well, it's 0. We want it to be 0. Well, of course you want it to be 0. We say, do you think you can get it to 0? And at the local level, they say, yes, we can. So the only way to get a national 0 is to have lots and lots of micro zeros and local zeros that end up adding up to a national 0. So you can't do anything about the national level on a lot of these things, and you can't influence national government on a lot of these things, but you can massively influence things locally and work with other local communities to have ultimately a massive national impact as well. And we've got to try and find some way of using that basic psychology as well, and that integrated collective work, and we've got to find some way to get that into our climate action as well.
Thank you, Paul. I am going to end it there, but I do want to give all our panelists a very big thank you. And what I'm going to say is, because I know a number of you got books and products and stuff, do you want to all have 30 seconds very quickly to promote your latest books or services? You've got an audience still. Let's start with Becky. I thought you'd mention Morganize.
I wasn't even in that world. Yes, let's do that.
It's mental health. It's
I love it.
Parents.
I'm not even going to talk about community engagement then, other than my side hustle, which is I've created an app for parents of junior school or elementary age children, because the more children you have, the more stuff you have to remember. So it's called Morganize Me. It's available from the app stores, and I'm on a mission to help the mental health of millions of parents just by giving them one less thing to worry about, reminding them what their kids need for school each day. Thank you, Andrew. Good reminder.
Wendy, you've got a new book.
Yes, I've got a new book, and a shout out to my partner, Christopher, who's in the audience today, because it's now in its 3rd format. We managed to do it, 3 of us from a cold start. We've got an immersive audio book with 90 pieces of music and 400 special effects. I'm the narrator. That was amazing. We've got the book. We've got the ebook. It's all available you can be ripped off by Amazon in a second. And it's about my climate change journey. I wasn't always in this Earth Goddess place, you know, I journeyed there. I said I'd do it in my 80th year, and I managed it just after I turned 80. So there it is, and it's available on amazon.com.au as well. Thank you for the chance.
Thank you, Wendy. Emma, do you have any products, books?
I don't have any books. No, I have no books or apps to promote, but if anyone who's here wants to connect with me on LinkedIn, please do. I'd love to connect with you and check out what I'm doing with Locale Learning, which is my business, which is about helping elected leaders be better leaders so we can have healthier democracies. So if you're working in that space with local councillors in particular, drop me a line. Love to share with you what I do. And thanks for being part of the panel. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Emma. And Paul, do you want to talk about the Jordan legacy? I noticed you just...
Yeah, I'll just finish it. I've just put a link in there. The paper that I've previously circulated includes a lot of stuff that we're doing, so I won't say any more as far as that's concerned. But yeah, the work of the Jordan legacy, please support it in any way you can. The link that I've put in there is the report that we published last year, which we published the first edition of on the 11th of July, which would have been Jordan's 38th birthday had he not died by suicide on the 4th of December 2019 at the age of 34. So we put that report out. We encouraged people to engage, to come up with further suggestions for how we can reduce the suicide numbers. And we got masses and masses of feedback and loads and loads and loads of practical suggestions. We did an entire research and engagement project for 6 months, asking one question: what practical actions can we take to get suicide numbers down? That was it. And we wrote that up in a report called Moving Towards a Zero Suicide Society. It gives a very practical outline of what a zero suicide society would look like. That's a society that is willing and able to do all it can to prevent all preventable suicides. It details all the practical actions that will get us there. And we're getting lots and lots of interest in this report. And we're rolling out a program next year. And we're all going on the road from the Humber to the Mersey on a big tour in June next year. And just this is what we do every day now. So anybody who wants to read that, please have a look. It's a great piece of research as well. And I would just ask everybody to get involved. If you're not already involved, get involved in suicide prevention. There'll be active organisations and movements in your country. There's the Zero Suicide Institute of Australasia, and I noticed the founder and chief executive Sue Murray was with us earlier, doing great work. And it is I work with a lot of people in transformational change. That's what we need in all these things: transformational change. And suicide prevention is one of the great transformational change challenges of our time, because we know we can get those numbers down from this, in the UK, 6,000 plus number. We know we can get them down towards zero. And anybody wants to join in, please join in.
Thank you very much, Paul. And finally, for myself, please do continue to support Global Community Engagement Day with the hashtag Global Community Engagement Day. We do have a range of t-shirts that you can buy to help support us as well. Becky is wearing an older version.
Yes, my own daughter designed this year's, and I didn't even order one yet. Look there, that's Florence's.
Hey. Thank you, Florence, for this year's design. Disconnected.
Can you just do that again for me? I just want to take a photo. Just stand up, Andrew. Thank you. Yeah.
Big shout out to Florence.
Yeah,
Becky's daughter.
Florence,
Big shout out to Florence for the wonderful t-shirt design. Well done, Florence.
Joshua, I think you're wearing a version as well there. I can see there are kind of standard versions available as well. 22, yeah. Thank you, Josh.
I'm going to stop recording.
There's a lot going on in the community engagement space as well. There's a lot of resources that have been shared in the chat. Margie, hey Margie, has just posted some interviews with engagement pioneers, which is a project she's currently working on. So click and watch some of those videos. She's doing some live launches of those as well soon in different time zones. I think I'm also going to give a shout out again to Isabella Giavolva, who is a drag act who's doing a show called Highway 12 Upgrade, which covers things like mental health in the community engagement process. And Isabella is going to be in Sydney on the 21st of February at the, I think it's the Darlinghurst Theatre. So if you are in Sydney at that time or in that area and want to go and see a drag show about community engagement, I'll put the link in the chat, that's there as well. There's a lot going on in this space. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this morning. That is the end of the show. Please.
Wonderful job, Andrew. Great
Thank you,
job.
Wendy.
Thank you
Thank you,
so much
Andrew.
for holding it together. You did a wonderful job of facilitating.
But there's
Bye,
loads-
everybody.
please-
Happy birthday, Wendy.
Happy birthday, Wendy.
Thank you,
Hashtag Global
everybody.
Community Engagement Day. Read the blogs, share on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, LinkedIn. Thank you. And
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
good night. Yeah.
See ya.